Hey everybody, in this series we're going to look at how to structure or put together a workout program for yourself while you're working out at home during the pandemic. And I would say this would apply anytime, whether you're at the gym or at home, pandemic or not pandemic. This is a very, hopefully, simple way to think about doing exercise that hits all of the major bases that we're trying to cover in resistance training exercise. If you're looking for maintaining your cardiovascular fitness or your conditioning, sort of metabolic conditioning type stuff, definitely check out the workouts that Stuart is doing and putting on our live stream and then in the archive, and they're also here on our YouTube channel. But if you're thinking about specifically how do I potentially build muscle, definitely how do I maintain muscle, anything, all the work that you've been doing in the last however long you've been working out for and you're worried about losing that while you're not at the gym anymore, this is what this video series is really meant for. So if we're looking at hitting all your major muscle groups, we can split this up sort of broadly into five or six different categories. I'm going to try to keep this as simple as possible. It's something I definitely like to nerd out on. So we'll see how simple I can keep it for you. Definitely, if you have questions or want me to go deeper, just ask and I'll be more than happy to get into it. So if we zoom out as far as possible, we could say that our body does pushing movements, pulling movements, and then stabilization movements. If we zoom in a little bit, we'll say that we can split our pushing movements up into upper body pushing and lower body pushing. We can do the same thing for our pulling movements, upper body pulling and lower body pulling. And then all that stabilization, this is normally what we think of with core work. If we want to get a little bit fancy, then we have accessory work. And accessory work is stuff that often will get hit when we're doing these other things, but that we could spend extra time on if we wanted to, either to bring up weaknesses or just because we like them. There's a lot of stuff in there like direct arm work that I would put in as accessories, but that does get hit if we're doing these other things. Even a lot of the core work, depending on how we do our major pushes and pulls, is going to get involved. So we can get a lot of sneaky core work in if we're doing a full body push-pull program. So the idea is if you're trying to find out what to do in your workouts at home, it'd be a good idea to pick, if you're doing a full body workout on one day, pick an upper body pushing movement, pick a lower body pushing movement, pick an upper body pulling movement, pick a lower body pulling movement. Depending on which ones you choose, you might want to pick core or stabilization exercise, and then you may or may not want to add in some accessory work. And that really depends on how much time you have and how much you want to do in your workouts. You might have extra time these days, so you're going to do extra accessory work or you're going to do extra core stabilization work. Okay, so if we're looking at your pushing movements for upper body, we could break this into vertical pushes, and that's stuff we normally think of as shoulder work, so shoulder presses, for example. And we could think of it as horizontal movements, and that's stuff that's going to be more chest-based or pectoralis work. And that would be push-up, bench press type of stuff. If we're looking at the lower body pushes, this is where we're going to get most of our quad and glute work done. And this is movements that are squat-like or lunge-like. Hip thrusts would go in there, and all our jumping is going to go into our lower body push exercises. When we look at the pull stuff in the upper body, we can split it up again, vertical and horizontal. With our pull stuff, we're still working lats, whether we're pulling vertically or horizontally. We're working biceps as well. But some of the assistant muscles are going to change. So if we're doing a horizontal pull, then we're going to have a little bit more of our rhomboids, our middle traps working. That won't necessarily work as much in a vertical pull. And then we have our lower body pulls. This is things that are hinge or hip based, so this would be stuff like deadlifts, pull throughs, and then kettlebell swings I would stick in there as well. And then we have things that are knee based, and that's like hamstring curls, essentially. There is sometimes a tiny bit of overlap between our lower body pushes and pulls, in that glutes are hip extensors. And a lot of this hinge or hip-based stuff, if you don't know what I'm talking about, that's a hip extension. The straighter you keep your knees when you're doing that hinge or hip-based lower body pull, the more hamstringy it's going to be. The more you let your knees bend, the less hamstrings can help out and the more gluty it becomes. So that's why we look at more of the hinge or hip-based stuff compared to a more squatty or lunge-based thing. And then when we look at our core muscle exercises, our stabilization exercises, the muscles of our core or our trunk can typically move in 4 ways. We have flexion, so we have exercises that can work into flexion. We have extension, so exercises that make us do this, rotation or torso twisting, and then lateral flexion. So we could be doing any exercises in those movements to be strengthening our core. We could also be resisting any of those movements. So the number of options we have just continues to grow and grow as we think of the core in the big picture as instability. And then we have our accessory exercises. So all our single joint arm stuff I would categorize as accessory. This is like biceps curls, triceps extensions, rotator cuff work. A lot of this stuff is going to happen in our upper body pushing and pulling. Bis are working pretty much every time you do a row or lat pull down. They won't if you're doing a straight arm pull down. So there are a couple exceptions. But for our major compound upper and lower body pushes and pulls, we're going to be hitting the muscles that we would hit with single joint arms. It doesn't mean we don't need to do them or don't want to do them. It just means if you're looking at, well, what's the minimum I can do to maintain my muscle conditioning, you might not have to do this accessory work, but it is fun. And then in the lower body, we have things like hip adduction and abduction, hip external rotation. So this is lots of band work, but also cable stuff that we normally do in the gym would fall under that category. Calves, I would place in accessory work. And that's because in a lot of lunging or squatting things and jumping, you're going to get calves working. So we don't need to hit them directly if we don't want to, but sometimes they can be fun. So if we get a handle on thinking of exercise in these ways, upper and lower body pushes and pulls, and then core or stabilization work, and then maybe if we want accessory work, we can start putting together workouts.